Hello friends, I am Shantanu, your coach, and now we are going to cover SEBI issue and listing of a non-convertible redeemable preference shares regulation 2013. This is very small chapter and chances are there that they may ask question from this chapter up to 2 to 6 marks. We will be covering this chapter wholly from exam point of view, so whatever which can be asked in the exam we are going to discuss all these here. Further, please note that there is a small correction in the material which has been provided to you. There is a small correction, but it is very important from exam point of view, so we are going to discuss that as well. Now we are going to see the background of these regulation first. As you are already aware, whenever company issue any security and try to list these security on the stock exchange, then the company will have to comply the SEBI regulation apart from complying the Companies Act. So these regulations normally cover the issue aspect, that is issue of security and the listing of security on the stock exchange. There are numerous regulations issued by the SEBI which are applicable to issue of different kind of security and their listing on the stock exchange. There are two important regulations which covers the non-convertible debt securities, that is issue and listing of debt security is covered by SEBI issue and listing of debt security regulation 2008. There is another regulation which is SEBI issue of capital and disclosure requirement regulation 2009, which covers the issue and listing of equity and convertible securities by a listed company. However, there were no such regulation which specifically deal with the issue and listing of non-convertible redeemable preference shares. Hence, the SEBI has notified these regulations, which are known as SEBI issue and listing of non-convertible redeemable preference shares regulation 2013, and these are the regulations which we are going to discuss here in this video. Now first let's try to understand the scope of these regulations. These regulations will cover the issue and listing of non-convertible redeemable preference shares. So it means if a company issue the preference shares and these preference shares are such that it cannot be converted into equity share later on, whether wholly or partly, then these will be treated as non-convertible preference shares and which are redeemable after a certain period. So you must be aware that company cannot issue a irredeemable preference shares. So whatever preference shares issued by company are necessarily redeemable preference shares. The only thing which you have to check that whether these redeemable preference shares are non-convertible preference shares. If these are non-convertible, then these regulations will be applicable to it. Now let's see the applicability of these regulations. Whenever a company make a public issue, it is not a private placement, it is a public issue. Whenever a company make a public issue of non-convertible redeemable preference share, in short we will use the term NCRP, then these regulation will be applicable to it. So first thing is very clear that whenever company make a public issue of these NCPRs, then these regulation will be applicable. Second, it will be applicable at the time of listing of NCPRs on the recognized stock exchange, which are issued by a public company through public issue or on a private placement basis. So even if the issue of NCPR is on private placement basis, but if these shares which are issued on private placement basis, when these shares will be listed on recognized stock exchange, then also these regulations will be applicable. Now another point which you have to remember that apart from companies, there are certain banking companies also on which these regulations will be applicable. Banking companies are those companies which are registered with the RBI, and if these banking company issue the perpetual non-cumulative preference shares, or it issue the innovative perpetual debt instrument. Now what these instruments are all about, we are going to see in definition, but for the time being you have to remember that these regulation will also be applicable to banking company which is issuing the perpetual non-cumulative preference shares or innovative perpetual debt instrument on private placement basis as per the guidelines issued by the RBI. Now very interesting point here to note that perpetual means which are not redeemable. So although the regulations, the name comes non-convertible redeemable preference share, but these are also applicable to the instrument that is perpetual, which can be issued by only banking company. A normal company which is registered under the Companies Act cannot issue perpetual non-cumulative preference share. So it is only the banking company which can issue the perpetual non-cumulative preference share or innovative perpetual debt instrument. And while issuing these instruments, these banking company will also have to follow these regulations. Now for better understanding of these regulations, let's go to the overview section of these regulations. The name, as we have already seen, it is SEBI Issue and Listing of Non-Convertible Redeemable Preference Shares Regulation 2013. This is the name of these regulations, and there are total 27 regulations which are divided into 7 chapters. Chapter 1 covers the preliminary matter, which are from Regulation 1 to Regulation 3. Then comes the Chapter 2, which covers the issue requirements for public issue, and there are Regulation number 4 to 15 which are covered under Chapter 2. Then Chapter 3 talks about the listing of non-convertible redeemable preference shares, and there are Regulation number 16 to 19 in it. Then comes Chapter number 4, which talks about the conditions for continuous listing and trading of these non-convertible redeemable preference shares, and there are only 2 regulations, 20 and 21. Then comes Chapter 5, which talks about the obligations of intermediaries and the issuer. There is only 1 regulation, Regulation number 22 in this chapter. Then comes Chapter number 6, which is for banks, that is the bank issuing and listing the non-equity regulated capital instrument. This Regulation number 23 covers these aspects under Chapter 6. Then comes Chapter 7, which talks about miscellaneous matter, and there are Regulation number 24 to 27 in it. Apart from these chapters, there are schedules. There are 2 schedules. Schedule 1 talks about the disclosure requirement. Whenever a company issue the offer document, there are so many disclosure the company will have to make. These are covered under Schedule 1, and Schedule 2 gives the format of due diligence certificate. This due diligence certificate will be issued by the intermediary, stating that all the requirement of regulations, acts and other laws have been complied by the entity which is issuing such non-convertible redeemable preference shares.